There are moments a family guards not out of shame, but out of something closer to reverence, and the Penrod family held theirs for a long time. Guy Penrod's children have finally spoken about their father, and what they shared is not what the gospel community expected to hear. What makes their words land so hard is not scandal or surprise in the tabloid sense, but something quieter and, for people of faith, far more meaningful. These are grown children describing the private man behind one of the most recognized voices in Southern gospel history, and the picture they paint is one that fans who have loved Guy Penrod through a microphone have never been given access to before. Stay with us, because the heart of what his family revealed comes through in the second half of this story, and the reason they waited this long to say it is something you will want to hear explained fully. Guy Penrod joined the Gaither Vocal Band in 1994, stepping into a role that demanded not just vocal ability, but a certain kind of presence, and he brought both in full measure. Tall, broad-shouldered, with long hair that gave him the look of someone straight out of the American West, his baritone tenor voice could quiet a room within the first 4 bars of a song. Bill Gaither, who has worked alongside virtually every significant voice in Christian music across 6 decades, has said more than once that Guy carried something that cannot be taught, an ability to make a lyric feel like personal confession rather than polished performance. From 1994 to 2008, Guy anchored the Gaither Vocal Band through one of the most celebrated stretches in the group's history. Sharing the stage with Michael English, David Phelps, Mark Lowry, and Wes Hampton, he appeared on dozens of homecoming recordings filmed everywhere from small southern churches to Carnegie Hall and the Sydney Opera House. Songs like Redeemed, I Believe, and Knowing You'll Be There reached audiences who came forward at altar calls, who wrote thousands of letters saying a specific Guy Penrod vocal had pulled them back to faith at the exact moment they needed it most. Behind all of that, behind the stage lights and homecoming cameras, Guy and his wife Angie were building something that is genuinely rare in any world, let alone in the pressurized environment of Christian celebrity. 10 children. Their home in Tennessee became the center of a life Guy spoke about with obvious warmth in interviews, though almost always in broad strokes. The family appeared in his testimony, but they remained private. They remained his, and that is exactly what makes their decision to speak now so striking. The years between 2005 and 2010 were not easy ones for Guy, though from the outside they may have looked like the peak of everything he had worked toward. The Gaither Vocal Band sat at the height of its homecoming-era reach. Guy's voice was in constant rotation in Southern gospel households across the country, and his face appeared on album covers and concert programs with regularity. By every visible measure, things were going well. But Guy has spoken in interviews, carefully and without self-pity, about the particular weight that comes with that kind of schedule. The travel, the time away from home, the specific grief of standing on a stage in front of 10,000 people while being genuinely absent from the dinner table where your children are asking why dad isn't there again. That tension lives in a complicated place when the work you're doing is ostensibly in service of faith and family, when the very words you are singing describe a life you feel you are not fully living. In 2008, at 42 years old and in full voice, Guy made a decision that caught the gospel world off guard. He stepped away from the Gaither Vocal Band. The official explanation pointed to a solo career, and that was true as far as it went. But what nobody expected was how completely he meant it when he said he wanted to come home. 10 children were growing up without their father at the breakfast table. A man who could coach Little League and sit in the pew beside his family on Sunday morning and be present for the 10,000 small moments that parents only get once, that was what he was choosing to become. That choice came with a real cost, and this is where most retellings of Guy's story stop paying attention. Solo careers in gospel music are genuinely difficult, even for artists carrying his level of name recognition. The infrastructure of the Gaither organization, the built-in homecoming audience, the momentum of being part of the flagship group in Southern gospel, stepping outside that system means rebuilding from the ground up. Guy did exactly that, quietly, without bitterness, and without any of the public grievances that sometimes follow an artist's departure from a group that large. What the gospel community has largely overlooked in the 15 years since that transition is what the rebuilding years actually looked like inside the Penrod household. And that is the part of this story that Guy's own children have only recently been willing to address directly. When Guy Penrod's children began speaking publicly, people who follow gospel music braced themselves. In an era when the grown children of Christian celebrities have frequently emerged from private lives, carrying complicated accounts of absent parents and the specific damage that religious fame can inflict on a household, the instinct was to read between their words for pain. What they offered was something rarer and, in its own way, far more moving than a grievance. The Penrod children, several of whom have spoken publicly in recent years through interviews, social media posts, and settings connected to Guy's ongoing ministry, described a father who, after walking away from the Gaither world, showed up. Consistently, completely, in ways they say they did not fully understand until they were old enough to grasp what it had cost him to do so. One of his sons has spoken about sitting in the driveway with his father for hours, long past midnight, talking about life, faith, and what it means to be a man trying to do right by his family when the world keeps presenting easier, shinier options. These were not conversations crafted for an audience. They happened because Guy had made himself genuinely available, because there was no tour bus to board, no sound check to get to, no green room full of people waiting on him. One of his daughters, in comments that circulated among fans of the family last year, put it more plainly than any interviewer has managed. She said that when she thinks about her father, she does not think first about the voice or the stage or the homecoming recordings, as beautiful as those things are. What she thinks about is him sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, an open Bible in front of him, available. Another of the children has spoken about watching Guy navigate the financial pressures of the post-Gaither years. Christian music, for all its spiritual weight, is still a business, and leaving the Gaither infrastructure meant facing a season of genuine uncertainty. Guy has never discussed the specifics in public, and his children have honored that boundary, but several have made clear that what they witnessed during those years was not a man diminished by difficulty. It was a man who ordered his priorities the way he believed faith required: family first, ministry through that family, and career as a vehicle for both. That is the testimony the gospel community has been slow to reckon with, perhaps because it lacks the drama of a public scandal, or the clean arc of a redemption story, or the simplicity of a straightforward inspirational moment. What his children are describing is an ordinary faithfulness, a man choosing day after day the harder and less visible thing, and that kind of story demands more of its listener than a headline ever will. For those who have followed Guy's journey across the decades, who wore out the homecoming cassette tapes and then the CDs, who know exactly which moment in Redeemed would bring a room to stillness, what his children have shared carries a particular weight. What they have confirmed is that the conviction behind the voice was real. Fans have described it that way for years, in letters to the Gaither organization, in conversations at concert merchandise tables, in the way people reach for words when trying to explain why a certain song reached them in a place they did not expect. There was always something in Guy's delivery that felt less like performance and more like testimony, a sense that he actually believed the words he was singing, that the lyrics were not just well-chosen phrases, but personal history. His children have now confirmed that the man behind the voice was consistent with the voice itself, and that is not a small thing. In Christian music, as in every public world, the distance between persona and private reality has proven heartbreaking often enough that people have learned to hold their admiration carefully. The testimony of Guy's children is, for the community that loved him, a kind of gift. It is also a challenge, if we are being honest, because what they are describing is not a dramatic turnaround or a miracle of second chances. What they are describing is the long, quiet work of showing up, of being a father on an ordinary Tuesday, of choosing presence over prominence, year after year, when prominence was genuinely within reach. For the millions of fans who grew up watching the Gaither homecoming videos and found in them something that steadied their faith, the Penrod family's story reflects the same truth those recordings always pointed toward, that the life these songs describe can actually be lived. One more part of this story has gone largely unconnected, and it matters for understanding not just Guy, but the world he came from and still belongs to. Bill Gaither has spoken consistently across 6 decades about what he is actually evaluating when he considers an artist for the Gaither Vocal Band. Voice matters, stage presence matters, and character matters most, specifically the kind of character that expresses itself when nobody is watching. Bill has described passing on artists with exceptional voices because something in their private life did not match their public witness, and holding on to artists through difficult seasons because he trusted their foundation even when everything around them was shaking. Guy Penrod joined the Gaither Vocal Band in 1994 because Bill Gaither heard something in his voice. He remained in that extended family for the years that followed his departure from the group because of something that goes beyond vocal ability. Bill has said in both public and private settings that Guy is one of the people he simply trusts, not just as an artist, but as a man, and from someone who has worked alongside hundreds of artists across 6 decades of gospel music, that is not casual praise. That trust connects directly to what the Penrod children have shared, because the father they are describing, the one who sat in driveways past midnight and at kitchen tables in the morning, who chose his family in the years when choosing his career would have been far easier, is exactly the kind of man Bill Gaither has spent his career trying to build a ministry around. Men and women whose private lives honor the music they make in public. The Penrod family, in speaking now, has not only honored their father. They have offered the gospel community something it needs, evidence that the life these songs describe is one that real people can actually live. What comes next for Guy Penrod and his family is something the gospel community will continue to watch with the same affection it has carried for 30 years. Guy continues to perform, record, and speak into the lives of audiences who find in his voice something that steadies them, and his children are growing into their own faith, their own understanding of what it means to carry a name that carries weight in the Christian world. One question his children's testimony leaves open is the one that every parent watching this is probably sitting with right now, and it is not really about Guy Penrod at all. It is the question of whether the people we love will one day tell the truth about who we were when no one was watching. Whether the private person will be recognizable as the same one who showed up in public. Guy's children have answered that question for their father. The rest of us are still writing our own answer. Whatever comes next, the fans who have followed this ministry across the decades know one thing, and it is the same thing this family has quietly demonstrated for years. Guy Penrod's story is not finished, and the most meaningful chapter of it was never the one that played out on a stage. If this story moved you, the next video will as well. We have been following the untold story of what David Phelps walked through in the years after leaving the vocal band, and what came out of that season is just as honest and just as unexpected as what we have shared with you here today.